Have you ever looked in the mirror and realized you've been living a version of yourself shaped entirely by everything but you? The expectations, the noise, the constant comparisons. So much of what we chase isn't even ours. In a world that tells you to keep watching others, keep measuring, keep running, what if the bravest thing you could do in 2025 is to simply come back to yourself? There was a time when a man could sit in silence and know the shape of his own soul. The pace of life permitted a kind of thoughtful reflection that nourished the spirit. But the year is 2025, and such quiet has become a rarity. The world has become louder than ever, voices unending, images relentless, opinions fast and furious. Every second offers new reasons to glance outward rather than inward. News, updates, alerts, feeds, they shout not with malice but with insistence. And so the inner voice, the one that speaks softly and only when invited, is drowned out before it can finish a sentence. The danger of this noise is not merely that it distracts, it deforms. It reshapes the soul in small, unnoticed ways. A man sees not what he believes, but what he's told to believe. A woman feels not what is truly hers to feel, but what the world has instructed is appropriate. In a world this loud, identity is not discovered. It is assembled from fragments of other people's expectations. And when that happens, the self is not formed but fractured. To live like this is to run a race that has no finish line. To chase meaning in a place where it has long since been buried. And yet, the tragedy is not only in the existence of the noise, but in how easily it is mistaken for substance. 1,000 voices can echo the same lie until it sounds like truth. You may hear you are behind, less than, late, irrelevant, not because it's real, but because the noise has said so often enough that it no longer needs evidence. The volume of modern life has become its own argument, and in the absence of stillness, even the absurd can feel convincing. Focusing on yourself in such a time is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of resistance. To quiet the voices of the world so that you might hear the voice within is, in this age, a radical act. But it is not easy. Silence is no longer passive. It must be chosen, defended, fought for. In every moment, there are invitations to fragment yourself into countless pieces, each one performing, responding, reacting, to say no to that pull, to step back and listen inwardly, is to claim your life back, inch by inch. The self you must return to is not an invention, not a product, not a brand. It is older than the distractions. It remembers when your joy wasn't borrowed from someone else's story, when your worth wasn't measured by numbers on a screen. That self has not been destroyed, only neglected. It waits, not with anger, but with patience, for your attention. But to meet it again, you must go through discomfort, the uneasy quiet, the awkward moments of not knowing what to do when no one else is watching, the itch to check, to scroll, to avoid. And yet, that discomfort is the doorway. Only there can you learn what you think when no one is telling you what to think. Only there can you feel the weight of your own convictions. Only there can you recognize the tone of truth apart from the chorus of noise. It is in that place, quiet and small, that the soul begins to speak again, and its voice will not match the crowd. It will often contradict the momentum of culture, but it will be yours. In such a loud world, clarity is found not in shouting louder, but in stepping back. And when you do, you will remember that the soul is not fed by noise, and the heart is not healed by clamor. They are fed and healed by attention, by silence, and by truth. Focusing on yourself then becomes not indulgence, but a return to something essential, something the noise cannot imitate and the world cannot give. To know oneself is not a luxury reserved for philosophers or monks in distant hills. It is a necessity for any human being who desires to live rightly in the world. Without self-knowledge, every decision is merely a guess, every relationship a gamble, and every conviction built on uncertain ground. And yet, in a time when knowing about everything else is so easy, when you can summon facts, opinions, and strangers' lives in an instant, the knowledge of the self has become strangely neglected. People can name 100 celebrities, but hesitate when asked to describe their own deepest beliefs. They know the algorithm, but not the heart behind their choices. They know what to say in public, but have forgotten what they truly think in private. To know oneself is not to simply list traits or interests. It is to sit with the uncomfortable questions long enough to hear the answers that do not flatter. It is to confront the disordered loves in your own life, the things you have made too important, and the truths you have quietly abandoned. It is to notice the patterns in your own choices, to discern what wounds you are still reacting to, and what fears shape your direction. This is not easy work, and it is not quick, but it is necessary, because until you understand yourself, you are not truly choosing your life. You are only responding to forces you haven't yet named. There is something deceptive about external success when self-knowledge is lacking. A person can build an impressive career, surround themselves with admiration, even be called wise or accomplished, and yet live in a house of mirrors. Never knowing which version of themselves is real, applause is a poor substitute for self-understanding. In fact, applause often hides the lack of it. The one who needs constant validation has not yet settled the question of their own worth. The one who fears stillness has not yet answered what waits for them in the quiet. These are not accusations but observations. They point to a deeper truth, that the most important work of your life cannot be outsourced. You must do it yourself. You must ask, watch, wrestle, and wait. Knowing yourself is not about becoming the center of the universe. It is about becoming clear enough to serve it well. You cannot give what you do not possess. You cannot love others rightly if your own identity is fragile. You cannot offer peace if your heart is ruled by chaos. When people do not know themselves, their love becomes entangled with neediness, their leadership with insecurity, their generosity with pride. But the person who has done the inward work carries a certain clarity. They are not perfect, but they are not easily swayed. They do not perform because they have nothing to prove. They do not hide because they have nothing to fear. Their yes means yes, and their no, no. They are whole, and so their life is not reactive but rooted. This kind of self-acknowledge, of course, is never complete. One does not arrive at the end of it and declare mastery. Rather, it is a lifelong posture, a habit of turning inward, not to navel gaze, but to listen honestly. It requires solitude, but not isolation. It demands truth, even when it is inconvenient, and it grants a kind of freedom that cannot be faked. A person who knows themselves walks differently in the world. They are not blown about by every wind of trend or panic. They move quietly, yet with direction. They are not trying to be someone, they already are. And in a world full of noise and confusion, that kind of presence is not only rare, it is revolutionary. The pursuit of approval is one of the quietest tyrannies of the modern soul. It arrives masked as affirmation, dressed in the glow of recognition, yet underneath it lies a hunger that can never be fully satisfied. In 2025, approval has become more accessible and more addicting than ever before. It is measured in metrics, in numbers, in tiny red hearts and fleeting comments. A person may now receive 1,000 nods of acknowledgement in a single moment and still feel utterly unknown. This is the strange reality of modern validation. It multiplies while it weakens. The more you seek it, the less it seems to offer. What makes this pursuit so dangerous is not merely that it fails to satisfy, but that it begins to alter the self it claims to reward. When your decisions are formed in the hope of pleasing others, your identity becomes a mirror of their expectations. You begin to speak not with conviction, but with calculation. You choose not from desire or belief, but from strategy. You ask not what is true or good, but what will be accepted, what will make the fewest waves, what will earn the most. And so you trade authenticity for applause, often without even realizing the exchange has occurred. This is not to say that approval is inherently wrong. It is a natural part of human life to desire belonging and affirmation. But when that desire becomes the compass, the soul loses its orientation. Approval cannot be the foundation of a meaningful life, because it is given by others who are just as uncertain, just as fragile, just as prone to shifting opinions as you. When your self-worth depends on public agreement, your peace is only as stable as the crowd's mood. And the crowd, history has shown, is often wrong. To focus on yourself, then, is not to disregard the voices of others, but to weigh them rightly. It is to build a life not on shifting affirmation, but on enduring truth. It is to say, I will be kind even if unnoticed. I will speak honestly even if unpopular. I will walk in integrity even if no one is clapping. This kind of living requires strength. It asks you to choose depth over display, process over performance, truth over trend. There is a particular danger when approval becomes your measure of goodness. You may find yourself doing the right things for the wrong reasons, serving, giving, working, not from love or conviction, but from the need to be seen. This turns even noble actions into transactions. The moment the praise fades, so too does your motivation. You begin to feel resentment, exhaustion, confusion. Why doesn't it feel fulfilling? Why does it feel so hollow? The answer is simple, though not easy, because it was never about truth, it was about reward. The deeper tragedy, however, is that the pursuit of approval can cause you to forget who you are entirely. You become so accustomed to shaping yourself to fit the tastes and trends around you that, in a moment of solitude, you may not even recognize your own voice. What do I believe? What do I want? What do I fear? These questions become harder to answer the longer you've silenced them beneath the noise of others' opinion. But they are the very questions you must return to if you want to live rather than perform. Focusing on yourself in this age means reclaiming the courage to walk without applause. It means listening inwardly, discerning carefully, acting freely, not out of rebellion, but out of rootedness. The person who knows their worth apart from approval becomes strangely powerful, not in the sense of control, but in the sense of freedom. They are no longer swayed by the winds of reaction. They move by conviction, not consent. And that kind of freedom, in a world addicted to praise, is the beginning of peace. The world in 2025 does not slow down. It moves with a kind of fever, an urgency that makes idleness feel like guilt and stillness feel like failure. Everywhere there is motion, scrolling, switching, scheduling, planning. A culture that once rewarded wisdom now rewards reaction, and silence has been replaced by constant stimulation. To be still is to risk falling behind. At least, that's what the world says. But beneath all this movement is a quiet truth many refuse to hear, that busyness is not the same as purpose, and speed is not a measure of direction. In this age of instant everything, even the soul is expected to keep pace. There is pressure to always be producing, improving, displaying progress. Productivity is worn like armor, and stillness is viewed with suspicion. Yet the human spirit was not designed for this kind of perpetual motion. Deep thought, meaningful change, and true peace are born only in stillness. When the noise is constant, the heart forgets how to speak, and when motion becomes compulsive, we risk becoming machines. Efficient, yes, but hollow. To focus on yourself in 2025 is to recognize the sacredness of stillness. It is to step back from the churn of doing and begin asking why. It is to pause long enough to hear your own breath, to feel your own thoughts return to you, unshaped by someone else's demand. Stillness is not the absence of effort. It is the soil in which clarity is planted. The greatest truths, the ones that last and carry weight, do not arrive in a rush. They come slowly, like dawn, and they require space to land. This kind of stillness does not just happen. It must be chosen, and more than that, it must be defended. Everything around you will conspire to pull you back into the blur. Notifications will ping, expectations will rise, and there will always be another thing to do. But unless you set boundaries, unless you say no to the constant pull, you will never have room for your soul to catch up with your body. There is a danger in always moving. You might forget what you were running toward in the first place. Stillness is where you begin to see the shape of your own life clearly. It is where regret speaks honestly and hope begins to stretch its limbs. In the quiet, you are no longer performing. There is no one to impress, no stage to maintain. You can laugh without echo and cry without audience. You return to being a human, not a project. And in that returning, strength is restored. Not the strength to do more, but the strength to do what matters. There are things in life that only grow in stillness. Wisdom, for one, discernment, gratitude. Without time to reflect, choices become shallow and habits become automatic. You begin to live reactively instead of intentionally. But stillness invites you to reconsider. It asks what truly matters, what you've been avoiding, what parts of yourself you've been ignoring in the name of being busy. In that space, decisions gain weight, relationships deepen, and priorities shift from urgent to important. It takes great courage to be still in a culture that runs on noise. It requires saying no to things that look successful but feel empty. It means being misunderstood, even pitied, by those who equate value with visibility. But stillness does not shout its rewards. It speaks in the quiet assurance of a centered soul. The one who has learned to sit still is not inactive. They are gathering, listening, becoming. And when they rise, they do not rush. They move with meaning. To focus on yourself in a world obsessed with comparison is to walk through a maze filled with mirrors. Everywhere you turn, reflections of someone else's life stare back at you. The age we inhabit is uniquely designed to amplify this experience. You do not merely live your life, you live it beside a curated montage of everyone else's. You wake in the morning not to your own thoughts, but to a stream of filtered triumphs, practiced smiles, and achievements framed in flattering light. The temptation to compare becomes almost reflexive. Without intending to, you begin measuring the worth of your own story by the apparent success of another's highlight reel. Comparison does not arrive with a trumpet blast. It slips in quietly, dressed in admiration or curiosity. It tells you that someone else has gone further, done more, been noticed, loved, celebrated, and you have not. It's not that you begrudge their joy, but their joy begins to make you question your own. Their pace begins to determine your urgency. Their applause becomes a haunting silence in your own life. And so, subtly, you adjust. You strive to catch up even though you never agreed to be in a race. The tragedy of comparison is that it convinces you to abandon your own journey. It distracts you from your unique path and persuades you to live a borrowed version of success. What once mattered deeply to you now feels inadequate, simply because it doesn't shine like someone else's. You start chasing goals that never belong to you, adopting dreams that don't fit the shape of your soul, measuring your worth by milestones that have nothing to do with your calling. This is not ambition, it is erosion. It wears away the edges of who you truly are until all that remains is a shape molded by other people's victories. But no two lives are the same, and they are not meant to be. Each soul carries its own rhythm, its own timing, its own unfolding. To compare the blossoming of one tree to another is to forget that even within the same garden there is diversity of season. Some grow quickly and early, others slowly and deeply. Some are visible in spring, others bloom in winter. The error lies in assuming that someone else's fruitfulness diminishes your own potential. In truth, the flourishing of another should be no threat to you, but comparison makes it feel like a competition, and that competition suffocates joy. The remedy for comparison is not pride, it is presence. It is the art of returning to your own life, to your own soil, your own breath, your own progress. It is realizing that your journey, though it may seem quiet or unimpressive by the world's standards, is profoundly yours, and that is sacred. When you begin to see clearly, you no longer envy the path of another, you bless it, and then you return to yours. You walk forward with humility and confidence, knowing that fulfillment cannot be borrowed, it must be grown. To focus on yourself is not to ignore others, but to recognize the falseness of measuring your soul with someone else's ruler. It is to believe that your life is worthy of attention, not because it outshines another's, but because it is yours to live. In a culture addicted to spectacle, choosing depth over display is a revolutionary act. It takes courage to stay in your lane, to keep your hands in your own soil, to nurture your own becoming without constantly glancing sideways. But that is where peace lives. Not in comparison, but in communion with your own unfolding. To truly focus on yourself requires a level of intentionality that cuts through the fog of habit, noise, and external suggestion. In the fast, fragmented world of 2025, distraction isn't an occasional nuisance, it's a constant undertow. We are never far from a screen, never beyond reach, always a notification away from having our attention seized and diverted. But the cost of this constant fragmentation is enormous. The mind, when pulled in 1,000 directions, loses the ability to think deeply, to dwell richly, or to hear the quieter voices within. To live without intention is to drift, and drifting is not the same as living. Intentional living does not begin with grand gestures or dramatic reinventions. It begins in the mundane, in the unnoticed moments that, when strung together, form the rhythm of a life. It is asking not just what you are doing, but why. Not just what fills your time, but what feeds your soul. The calendar may be full, the inbox overflowing, the days booked with responsibilities, but if none of it aligns with what you believe matters most, then the momentum is nothing more than movement. It's possible to be incredibly busy and yet profoundly absent from your own life. Focusing on yourself means reclaiming your time, your energy, your choices, not as acts of selfishness, but as acts of stewardship. The person who lives with intention is not merely reactive, they are rooted. They understand that every yes they give is a no to something else, and so they choose carefully. They are not swayed by urgency for its own sake, nor do they chase the latest trend simply to stay relevant. Instead, they ask, what kind of life am I building? What kind of person am I becoming? And do my daily actions reflect that vision? This kind of self-focus is quiet and steady. It isn't about perfection, it's about alignment. It's about ensuring that your inner life and outer life are not at war with one another. So many people live divided, saying one thing, feeling another, believing one truth, practicing another, longing for peace, but building a life that never allows for rest. But the person who focuses on themselves with intention begins to bring those fragments together. They choose work that matters, not just work that pays. They cultivate relationships that nourish, not just those that entertain. They set boundaries, not to push others away, but to protect what is sacred within. Living with intention also demands that you ask uncomfortable questions. It requires that you examine your motivations, acknowledge your weaknesses, and confront the places where you've been running on autopilot. There is a kind of bravery in pausing and re-evaluating what you've always done. In fact, it may be the rarest form of courage in a world obsessed with consistency. But the truth is, only those who reflect can truly grow. Without reflection, we repeat. Without intention, we drift into patterns that do not serve us and may even destroy us. This is not a call to obsess over every detail or to micromanage your own existence. Rather, it is an invitation to wake up, to be present in your own life, to stop living as though time is endless and begin treating it as the precious resource it is. The person who focuses on themselves with intention will not always be the loudest or the most visible. They may not receive applause or trend on any platform, but they will carry within themselves a quiet stolidity. They will know what they are living for. And in knowing that, they will walk through the world not with frantic energy, but with deliberate peace. The world in 2025 offers 1,000 ways to lose yourself and only a handful of ways to find yourself again. You are told to look outward, to measure yourself by others, to chase applause, to run faster, do more, be everything all at once. But none of that leads home. Home is found inward. Peace is not in comparison, but in clarity. Strength is not in noise, but in stillness. Your worth was never meant to be borrowed, nor your path traced by someone else's footsteps. To focus on yourself is not an act of selfishness, but of sacred responsibility. It is the daily choice to live from the inside out, not shaped by approval, not distracted by the lives of others, not numbed by busyness or lost in noise. It is to return to your own breath, your own purpose, your own becoming. And when you begin to live from that place, rooted, intentional, and free, you no longer need to compete, prove, or perform. You simply become, and that is more than enough.